the standard calendar, and the human perception of geological safety are built on a profound sensory illusion. On a global scale, we define stability by the absence of noticeable vibration, equating a silent horizon with a stable crust. Yet, in the rigorous framework of geophysical systems analysis, this logic is inverted. Yesterday morning, at exactly 35 minutes past 11 Universal Time, a localized disruption exposed the structural fragility of this assumption. Deep beneath the dark, freezing waters of the Pacific Ocean, approximately 218 kilometers west of Bandon on the southern Oregon coast, the Earth abruptly shifted. The United States Geological Survey pinned the epicenter at 43.38 degrees north and 127.08 degrees west, registering a shallow depth of 10 kilometers. Measured by human impact, the metrics read as an absolute non-event. The magnitude was as a modest 5.5. The structural damage was 0. The injury count was 0. The official agency alert color was a reassuring green. On any average day, an earthquake of this scale is lost in the global baseline noise, a routine release of energy that occurs well over 1,000 times a year across the planet. In the 7 days surrounding this event alone, the global catalog logged more than 100 tremors of magnitude 4.5 or greater. Had this energy discharged anywhere else, it would have remained confined to automated laboratory logs. Yet, as the seismic waves traveled cleanly through the regional crust, triggering perceptible vibrations, as far as 600 kilometers north in Victoria, British Columbia, it sparked an immediate wave of systemic dread. The shock was not driven by the physical amplitude of the shaking, but by a cold geographic calculation. This moderate event occurred at the immediate southern doorstep of the Cascadia subduction zone, a highly volatile megathrust fault spanning 1,100 kilometers from Cape Mendocino in northern California to Vancouver Island in Canada. This is the single most feared, intensely monitored tectonic boundary in North America, a geological system currently holding an immense, unmitigated structural deficit. For 326 years, this massive engine has not released a major earthquake, loading in total, uninterrupted silence since its last catastrophic rupture in the year 1700. In a locked subduction system, prolonged silence is never an indicator of stability. It is the ultimate indicator of mounting pressure. Along this 700-mile margin, the oceanic Juan de Fuca plate is relentlessly driven eastward, forced directly beneath the massive North American plate at a rate of several centimeters per year. Near the surface, the interface between these two colossal bodies of rock is completely stuck, fused together by immense friction, while the deeper, hotter machinery of the planet continues to grind forward unabated. The upper lock zone refuses to budge. As a direct result, tectonic strain accumulates continuously within the crust, warping and bending the rock exactly like a heavy steel bar subjected to an unyielding mechanical load. When this structural lock inevitably fails, the accumulated displacement of more than 3 centuries will release not in a gradual dissipation, but in a violent multi-minute equalization. The established consensus among geophysicists, emergency planners, and modern building codes is clear. The Cascadia subduction zone is not built for minor venting. It is structurally engineered to fail all at once, producing a full margin magnitude 9.0 event, an explosion of energy thousands of times more powerful than yesterday's offshore jolt. This inevitable collapse will instantly generate a massive tsunami, capable of striking the immediate Pacific Northwest coastline in as little as 15 to 20 minutes, leaving virtually zero window for human evacuation. This overarching reality explains why a minor fracture in the deep ocean caused millions of individuals across 3 states to collectively hold their breath. The immediate human reaction was a historical reflex, an urgent systemic question flashing through the regional consciousness. Is this the first fracture of the Great Collapse? To understand the true mechanism of what occurred, we must isolate the precise physics of the event from the popular narrative. Seismological data reveals that yesterday's magnitude 5.5 earthquake was almost certainly not a direct slip on the actual Cascadia megathrust interface. Occurring 218 kilometers offshore, the rupture took place within the young oceanic crust seaward of the primary subduction zone, a highly stressed, complex region defined by the Blanco Transform Fault and the continuously deforming Gorda and Juan de Fuca plates. This outer crustal zone is heavily fractured and regularly undergoes localized adjustments under the immense forces driving the plates. There is a fundamental mechanical distinction between a full rupture of the locked megathrust boundary and a localized routine failure within the incoming oceanic plate. Yesterday, the locked interface did not break. The system experienced a twitch in the feeding machinery, not the catastrophic failure of the main structural anchor. But this distinction offers cold comfort to systems analysts. The plate that fractured yesterday is the exact same slab currently being shoved into the locked maw of Cascadia. It is an intrinsic component of the very same machine, meaning this offshore event serves as a stark, instrumentally verified proof that the entire global apparatus is highly active, responsive, and operating under a massive, accelerating load. It forces us to confront a profound paradox that lies at the absolute center of all modern subduction zone research, a conceptual fault line that defies our basic intuition about the natural world. If a quiet fault is actually a highly loaded, dangerous fault, and if minor earthquakes are merely symptoms of the deeper stress driving the system, it strips away our ability to find comfort in a peaceful horizon. It leaves researchers and coastal populations tracking an invisible countdown, staring into a blank window of time. How can we diagnose the critical limits of a system when its primary diagnostic signal is absolute stillness? If the forces that feed the ultimate catastrophe are completely silent, how do we identify the precise boundary line where routine tectonic loading ends and the final, irreversible failure begins? To calibrate the true scale of the Cascadia hazard, we have to look directly at the physical evidence left behind by the last complete system failure. For centuries, the lack of European written records in the Pacific Northwest created a false sense of security, an assumption that the region was immune to megaquakes. That illusion shattered when researchers synchronized three independent lines of evidence that converged on a single historic moment, the night of January 26th in the year 1700. The first clue came from across the ocean in the form of an orphan tsunami. Japanese historical archives document a sudden, destructive wave that inundated coastal villages with absolutely no local earthquake to explain its origin. By calculating the transoceanic travel time of the wave, scientists tracked the source back to the Pacific Northwest. The second line of evidence is structural and biological, preserved in the ghost forests along the Oregon and Washington coasts. Here, stands of ancient western red cedar stand dead and bleached. Tree ring analysis reveals that their growth stopped abruptly between the autumn of 1699 and the spring of 1700, the exact moment the coastline suddenly dropped several feet during a massive coseismic subsidence, allowing lethal salt water to flood their root systems. The third record comes from the oral histories of the indigenous peoples of the coast, passed down through generations, describing a catastrophic night when the ground shook violently and the ocean rose to swallow entire villages. This convergence of rock, trees, and human memory confirms that Cascadia is entirely capable of generating full margin magnitude 9.0 events. To understand the rhythm of these events, scientists had to look even deeper, drilling into the ocean floor to extract sediment cores. When a great megathrust earthquake strikes, it triggers massive underwater landslides that rush down the continental slope, depositing distinct layers of sand and silt known as turbidites. By mapping these layers across 10,000 years of geological history, researchers have cataloged roughly 40 major earthquakes along the zone. Crucially, about 10 of these events ruptured the entire 1,100-kilometer fault at once. The deep data reveals an unsettling asymmetry. The southern third of the fault, right where yesterday's quake struck, experiences partial ruptures much more frequently than the system as a whole. This elevates the formal hazard probability to a staggering 1 in 3 chance of a major rupture affecting the southern segment within the next 50 years. This is not a theoretical abstraction. It is a mathematical certainty built into regional emergency plans. A full margin failure means 4 to 6 continuous minutes of violent shaking, a structural load that will instantly compromise older buildings, fracture the coastal highway in hundreds of places, and sever critical bridges from California to British Columbia. Before the shaking even stops, the first tsunami waves will hit the beaches, leaving no time for conventional evacuation and effectively isolating entire coastal populations from outside assistance for weeks. While the public fixates on this visible surface-level destruction, an entirely different kind of tectonic movement has been quietly firing off under our feet. In the exact same week as the offshore earthquake, the Regional Monitoring Network detected a massive spike in tectonic tremor. Over a single 7-day window, sensitive instruments logged between 3,000 and 3,100 individual tremor epicenters along the Cascadia margin, including an intense single-evening burst of 535 discrete slow slip events. This is a phenomenon known as episodic tremor and slip. Unlike the sudden brittle fractures that cause felt earthquakes, this activity occurs deep down dip on the plate interface, where temperatures are higher and the rock behaves like a highly viscous fluid. Here, the plates do not lock. They slide past each other over a period of days or weeks, releasing energy as a faint, continuous, acoustic hum that can only be detected by specialized seismometers. This deep slip occurs on a remarkably regular schedule, returning roughly every 14 months in the north and even more frequently in the south. During this latest cycle, the energy was heavily concentrated beneath Northern California and the Puget Sound region near Seattle. This means that in the span of less than 48 hours, the Cascadia system was activated at two completely different structural levels. A brittle crustal fracture occurred in the outer oceanic plate offshore, while a massive slow slip episode rippled through the deep roots of the subduction zone below. Popular internet commentary immediately rushed to link these events to superficial, unscientific external triggers, blaming everything from solar flares to sudden shifts in the Earth's geomagnetic field. But the physical laws of energy budgets quickly dismantle these myths. The energy carried by solar particles or geomagnetic fluctuations is orders of magnitude too small to exert any measurable mechanical force on a locked tectonic fault miles beneath the Earth's crust. Furthermore, instruments confirm that the geomagnetic field remained completely quiet during this entire period of elevated seismic activity, directly contradicting any claims of an external cosmic driver. The true relationship between the deep tremor and the offshore quake is far more grounded in mechanical reality, and far more unsettling than a simple headline. The routine deep, slow slip does not relieve the overall pressure on the system. Instead, it actively transfers its stress directly upward, concentrating the load onto the shallow, locked segment of the fault that is already overdue for a major rupture. Each time the deep section slips and hums, the invisible clock ticks closer to its structural limit, priming the megathrust for its eventual unavoidable collapse. Widening the analytical lens reveals that the offshore Oregon fracture did not occur in isolation. Within the same 48-hour window, the Pacific Ring of Fire activated globally. Off Cordova, Alaska, a magnitude 5.3 shock rattled the margin that produced the colossal 1964 magnitude 9.2 earthquake. Across the ocean, a dense seismic swarm ignited along the Manila Trench off western Luzon in the Philippines, accompanied by aftershocks near Mindanao, following an earlier magnitude 7.8 event. Simultaneously, the planetary network registered a magnitude 5.2 in eastern Sichuan, China, a cluster of ruptures across Indonesia, a deep displacement near Japan's Volcano Islands, and a magnitude 4.9 in the Kermadec Islands. In total, the global baseline catalog tallied 108 discrete earthquakes of magnitude 4.5 or greater within a 7-day window. To the untrained observer, this widespread activation suggests a coordinated planetary acceleration. But rigorous statistical analysis dismantles this impression. The Ring of Fire operates under continuous, massive structural loads along its entire length. In any random window, simple probability guarantees that multiple moderate events will manifest across these independent boundaries. There is no causal mechanical link between an Oregon crustal fracture and a Philippine trench swarm. True seismic triggering remains limited to local aftershocks or rare dynamic triggering, where immense surface waves nudge a distant fault that is already at its absolute breaking point. None of those conditions were met here. The reality is not one of synchronized communication, but of an interconnected plate system expressing its baseline stress in multiple nodes at once. Among these active nodes, the highest immediate systemic risk concentrated along the Manila Trench off western Luzon. This boundary demands urgent scrutiny because its underlying metrics are far more volatile than those recorded off Oregon. The Philippine swarm presented a highly unusual structural pattern, a cluster of events, including a magnitude 5.0 and multiple magnitude 4.0 shocks, occurring without a distinct high-amplitude main shock. In operational seismology, a swarm lacking a clear primary event represents the specific configuration associated with a potential foreshock sequence, an unstable period of structural microcracking that can precede a major megathrust failure. The physics of the Manila Trench exacerbate this hazard. The tectonic plates here converge at an exceptionally rapid velocity of approximately 100 millimeters per year, far faster than Cascadia. Having remained locked without a major stress-relieving event for centuries, the system is accumulating its energy deficit at an accelerating pace. Advanced modeling sets the maximum credible ceiling for a Manila Trench rupture at a magnitude 9.2. Because of the fault's immediate proximity to dense coastal infrastructure, a resulting 15-meter tsunami would penetrate Manila Bay in as little as 2 minutes. This window completely eliminates the possibility of regional warning or organized evacuation, presenting a human vulnerability factor far more acute than any hazard in North America. This global snapshot brings the investigation back to its core human realities. Despite internet claims linking these events to solar flares, the physical energy budgets quickly disprove such theories, and open international monitoring networks confirm no data is being hidden. The ultimate challenge of the Cascadia subduction zone is not a grand cosmic conspiracy, but the quiet reality of household preparedness. The profound discomfort of modern geophysics lies in the whispering nature of its baseline signals. If a moderate offshore jolt and an unfelt deep tremor are the only markers we receive, we are left confronting the ultimate unanswerable question of systems analysis. How do we distinguish between an ordinary quiet week of routine loading and the final quiet week before everything changes? The structural integrity of modern society rests upon a deep engineering paradox. Our critical networks are built to withstand expected loads, yet the geological systems beneath them operate on timelines that transcend our historical memory. When we analyze the Hume factor within the Pacific Northwest, the true vulnerability is not a lack of awareness, but a structural deficit in civil infrastructure. The building codes and emergency frameworks across Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia are designed around a consensus probability, a calculated bet that we have time to retrofit, reinforce, and rebuild. But a system under continuous, unyielding stress does not respect political timelines or capital allocation cycles. The reality is that we are forced to operate within a window where the margin for error has already been completely eroded by 326 years of silent accumulation. When the locked interface finally slips, the transformation of the built environment will occur as a direct translation of stored elastic energy into mechanical destruction. The multi-minute duration of a magnitude 9.0 event introduces a factor that standard earthquake drills fail to simulate: structural fatigue. Materials like concrete and steel can withstand short, intense shocks, but when subjected to 4 to 6 minutes of continuous violent displacement, their internal matrices begin to degrade. Overpasses will not simply crack, their supports will experience catastrophic failure. Bridges connecting vital supply corridors will separate from their spans. Roads will undergo liquefaction, turning solid ground into a fluid mass that swallows heavy vehicles and renders evacuation routes entirely useless. This is the physical architecture of isolation, a scenario where the immediate geography of the Pacific Northwest is fractured into dozens of isolated islands, completely cut off from the regional grid and from each other. This systemic breakdown highlights the fundamental flaw in relying on external rescue models. In standard localized disasters, neighboring jurisdictions can rapidly deploy resources to the affected zone. But a full-margin Cascadia rupture is a macro-regional crisis that simultaneously cripples infrastructure across 3 states and a Canadian province. There is no unaffected neighboring zone capable of launching an immediate relief effort. The coastal highway, a primary artery for emergency logistics, will be severed in hundreds of separate locations by landslides and structural collapses. Emergency managers openly acknowledge that relief will not arrive in hours or days. It will take weeks. This shifts the operational burden entirely onto the micro-component of the system, the individual household. Survival ceases to be a question of state intervention and becomes a strict calculation of immediate, hyperlocal reserves of water, medical supplies, and energetic self-sufficiency. This extreme vulnerability explains why alternative, unscientific narratives gain traction so easily. Faced with an unpredictable countdown and an invisible threat, the human mind seeks comfort in predictable external cycles, creating myths about solar triggers or atmospheric anomalies. It is a psychological defense mechanism designed to replace an unreadable geological clock with a visible cosmic one. But the telemetry from our open, cross-checked seismic networks tells a far more grounded story. The Earth is not reacting to distant solar winds. It is executing an internal thermodynamic mandate. The energy budget of the planet is entirely self-contained, driven by the massive, slow convection of the mantle that shoves oceanic plates into continental margins. The silence of the fault is not a pause in this engine. It is the physical manifestation of energy being compressed into the rock, waiting for the moment when the force of the load exceeds the sheer strength of the boundary. We are left operating a modern civilization on top of a highly pressurized, locked engine. The true hazard is not that the system is broken, but that it is working exactly as it is designed to. The offshore earthquake and the deep tremor are not anomalies. They are the standard operational signals of a planetary machine under load. As the data streams into our laboratories, it offers no clean predictions, no comforting timeline, and no easy answers. It simply confirms that the countdown is active. The silence holding the Pacific Northwest is the sound of a system approaching its ultimate physical limit, a quiet reminder that the stability we take for granted is merely a temporary pause in a cycle of catastrophic equalization that we cannot stop, cannot delay, and cannot avoid. The ultimate limit of our understanding of geophysical systems is not our lack of computational power, but the fundamental nature of the processes we are trying to observe. When we aggregate the telemetry from the offshore Oregon earthquake, the deep, slow slip tremors beneath the continental crust, and the volatile swarms across the ring of fire, we are not looking at isolated anomalies. We are observing the operational baseline of a planetary thermal engine that operates completely independently of human civilization. The core discomfort of the Cascadia subduction zone lies precisely in this structural detachment. We have constructed modern enclosed centers and drafted building codes based on historical probabilities, yet the geological architecture under our feet continues to store energy with absolute indifference to our planning. The system does not vent its stress predictably. It absorbs the load silently, compressing the crust until the physical boundary condition of friction is completely overwhelmed. This brings us to the final deconstruction of the superficial narratives that populate public discourse whenever the Earth twitches. The persistent desire to attribute seismic activity to cosmic factors, such as solar flares or external geomagnetic shifts, reveals a fundamental human bias, the need to find a loud, visible cause for a catastrophic effect. But the real physical boundaries of our planet are defined by an internal energy budget that requires no external amplification. The grinding of the Juan de Fuca plate beneath North America, the rapid subduction at the Manila Trench, and the continuous seismic baseline of the Pacific Rim are driven by vast convective currents deep within the Earth. This internal engine possesses an inertia so colossal that human activity cannot influence it. The threat is entirely self-contained, rational, and bounded by the laws of structural mechanics. By looking to the skies for explanations, public perception misses the actionable reality of local structural vulnerabilities, substituting a solvable engineering challenge with an existential myth. Therefore, the true diagnostic challenge for modern research is evaluating a system whose most dangerous state is absolute stillness. Seismologists can cross-check global networks, map turbidite histories over 10,000 years, and calculate the exact probabilities of full-margin ruptures. They can document 3,000 deep tremor epicenters in a week, or track a swarm without a main shock on the far side of the ocean. Yet, none of these observations can yield a precise short-term forecast. The base rate for a moderate offshore quake or a routine slow slip event escalating immediately into a megathrust failure remains mathematically low. But because the system is already deep within its historical recurrence window, operating 326 years into a cycle that has repeatedly failed on shorter timelines, every minor event occurs against a backdrop of critical loading. The fault is not sleeping. It is holding its breath, transferring stress from the fluid depths up to the locked surface. This leaves us with a sobering conclusion regarding the limits of human foresight when confronted with macro geophysical systems. We are waiting for an event that has already occurred in the past and is structurally guaranteed to happen again, yet the warning signs we are given are fundamentally quiet. A magnitude 5.5 jolt far out in the deep ocean crust, a faint structural hum that can only be captured by laboratory instruments, a minor clustering of shocks on the far side of the ocean. If this is the maximum resolution of the data the planetary machine provides before a major equalization, then we must accept that there is no distinct, unambiguous signal that will announce the transition to catastrophe. We cannot read the clock. We can only track the continuous, unyielding accumulation of the load. Yesterday, the quietest fault in North America spoke just loudly enough to register on our seismographs,